Martin Van Buren was born on December 5, 1782, in the small Dutch-speaking village of Kinderhook, New York. His story is a quintessentially American one, a journey from modest origins to the nation's highest office. He was the first president born a citizen of the United States, since all his predecessors were born as British subjects before the American Revolution. His father, Abraham Van Buren, was a farmer and the owner of a local tavern, which was a bustling hub of commerce, travel, and political gossip. His mother, Maria Hose Van Allen, had children from a previous marriage, so young Martin grew up in a large and blended family. The Van Buren household wasn't wealthy, but it really was at the center of community life, giving Martin an early education in human nature and the art of conversation. Growing up in the tavern environment was a unique classroom for the future president. Here, he observed travelers from all walks of life, listened to passionate political debates among neighbors. This constant exposure to different people and perspectives sharpened his mind and taught him the value of listening more than speaking. He absorbed the rhythms of everyday life, the concerns of farmers, the ambitions of merchants, and the arguments of local politicians. This upbringing gave him a remarkable ability to understand and connect with people, a skill that would later earn him the nickname, the Little Magician, for his political prowess. The world of Kinderhook was deeply rooted in Dutch traditions, and the Van Buren family was no exception. They spoke Dutch at home, and their cultural identity was a significant part of their lives. However, this heritage also placed them just a bit outside the dominant English-speaking establishment of the young nation. The family's financial situation was often precarious, and Abraham Van Buren was a landowner but also a debtor. They owned several enslaved people, a common practice in the Hudson Valley at the time. This exposed Martin to the complex and contradictory institution of slavery from a young age. This first-hand experience would later inform his cautious and often pragmatic political positions on the issue. Unlike many of his contemporaries who inherited vast estates and political connections, Martin Van Buren had to rely on his own wit, charm, and tireless ambition to make his way in the world. Martin Van Buren's formal education was limited, ending when he was just 14 years old. He attended the local village school, where he received a basic but solid grounding in reading, writing, and arithmetic. Recognizing his son's sharp intellect and verbal talents, Abraham Van Buren arranged for him to begin a law apprenticeship in 1796 with Francis Sylvester, a prominent lawyer in Kinderhook. This was a common path for aspiring attorneys at the time, a hands-on education that involved menial tasks like sweeping floors and copying documents by hand, but also offered invaluable exposure to legal arguments and courtroom strategy. During his apprenticeship, Van Buren immersed himself in the world of Federalist and Republican politics. The Sylvester Law Office was a bastion of the Federalist Party, the party of Alexander Hamilton and John Adams. Yet Van Buren, influenced by his family's more modest background and Jeffersonian sympathies, found himself drawn to the Democratic-Republican Party. He fearlessly engaged in political debates with his mentors and their associates. This period was crucial in shaping his political identity and his understanding of the fierce partisan battles that defined the era. In 1801, at the age of 18, Van Buren moved to New York City to complete the final year of his legal studies in the office of William P. Van Ness, a close associate of the formidable politician Aaron Burr. Under Van Ness's mentorship, Van Buren was introduced to the sophisticated and often ruthless world of New York politics. He learned about organizing party loyalists, managing campaigns, and using the press to shape public opinion. He witnessed firsthand the power of a disciplined political organization, a lesson he would later apply with masterful effect in building his own political machine. After being admitted to the bar in 1803, Van Buren returned to Kinderhook and opened a law practice with his half-brother. He quickly gained a reputation as a talented lawyer, known for his thorough preparation, eloquent arguments, and deep understanding of both the law and human psychology. This legal career was not just a profession, it was the launching pad for his political ambitions. It allowed him to build a network of allies, demonstrate his intellectual capabilities, and establish himself as a leader in his community, paving the way for his entry into elected office and the larger political stage. Martin Van Buren's true genius was not just in practicing law or winning individual elections, it was in his revolutionary vision for political organization. He saw that the old way of politics, based on personal loyalties and elite family connections, was fading. In its place, he envisioned a new system built on party discipline, public opinion, and broad-based coalitions. His political laboratory was New York, where he methodically constructed a powerful political organization known as the Albany Regency. This group was not a formal entity but a disciplined network of loyal politicians, newspaper editors and office holders who worked together to advance the principles and candidates of the Democratic-Republican Party, which would later evolve into the Democratic Party. The Albany Regency was a model of political efficiency. Van Buren understood the importance of party loyalty above all else. He pioneered the use of the spoils system, the practice of rewarding loyal party workers with government jobs and appointments. While his critics decried this as corrupt, Van Buren saw it as a necessary tool to build a cohesive and motivated party structure. He also masterfully used newspapers as a tool for communication and persuasion, establishing the Albany Argus as the official voice of the Regency. Through its pages, the party could coordinate its message, rally its supporters, and attack its opponents with a unified voice. As he rose through the ranks of New York politics, serving as a state senator and then as the state's attorney general, Van Buren perfected his methods. He believed that political parties were not a necessary evil, as many of the founding fathers had thought, but a positive good. He argued that parties provided a crucial check on power, gave ordinary voters a clear choice, and helped to channel political conflict into organized, predictable contests rather than chaotic factionalism. His philosophy was that a permanent opposition party was essential for a healthy democracy, as it ensured that the party in power would remain accountable to the people. This was a radical idea for its time, but one that would become the bedrock of the American political system. Van Buren's success in New York did not go unnoticed on the national stage. When he was elected to the United States Senate in 1821, he brought his organizational principles to Washington, D.C. He saw the potential for a new national coalition that could resurrect the old Jeffersonian alliance between the planters of the South and the plain Republicans of the North. He became the chief architect of the political movement that rallied around Andrew Jackson. By applying the lessons of the Albany Regency on a national scale, Van Buren helped to forge the Democratic Party, the first modern, mass-based political party in American history. He was not just a politician, he was the primary engineer of the very machinery of modern American politics. When Andrew Jackson won the presidency in 1828, he knew he needed a skilled political operator to help him navigate the treacherous waters of Washington. He chose Martin Van Buren as his Secretary of State, the most prestigious cabinet position. This appointment was a testament to Van Buren's role in engineering Jackson's victory. From the moment he arrived in Washington, Van Buren became Jackson's most trusted advisor and confidant. He was a calming, pragmatic influence on the often impetuous president. One of the first challenges Van Buren helped Jackson navigate was the infamous Petticoat Affair. The social lives of Washington's political elite were thrown into turmoil over Peggy Eaton, the wife of Secretary of War John Eaton. The other cabinet wives, led by Floyd Calhoun, refused to socialize with her, citing rumors about her past. Jackson, who saw parallels to the slander his own late wife Rachel had endured, was furious and defended Mrs. Eaton. Van Buren, a widower, cleverly sided with Jackson and the Eatons, earning him even greater favor with the president. He used the crisis to his advantage, helping to orchestrate a cabinet reorganization that purged his rivals, including the supporters of Calhoun, his chief competitor for the succession. As Secretary of State, Van Buren's diplomatic record was solid. He successfully negotiated a treaty with Great Britain to open up trade with the British West Indies, a goal that had eluded previous administrations. However, his most significant work was domestic. He was the chief strategist behind Jackson's policies, including the controversial Indian Removal Act of 1830. His loyalty and skill were rewarded in 1832, after a brief and calculated stint as minister to Great Britain, a post his rival John C. Calhoun blocked in the Senate, inadvertently making Van Buren a political martyr. He returned to the United States as a hero. Jackson chose him as his running mate for his second term, replacing Calhoun. As vice president, Van Buren was clearly positioned as Jackson's chosen successor, the heir apparent to the new Democratic Party. He had successfully navigated the treacherous currents of the Jackson administration, outmaneuvering his rivals and cementing his position as the little magician who could make political magic happen. As Andrew Jackson's second term drew to a close, there was little doubt about whom he wanted to succeed him. Martin Van Buren had proven himself to be Jackson's most loyal and effective lieutenant, the political mastermind who had helped transform Jackson's popular appeal into a durable political party. In May of 1835, the Democratic Party held its first-ever national convention in Baltimore, a carefully orchestrated event designed to officially nominate Van Buren for the presidency. The convention was a demonstration of the party machinery that Van Buren himself had built. It showcased party unity and anointed him as the standard-bearer of Jacksonian democracy, tasked with continuing the policies and principles of Old Hickory. The opposition, however, was fractured and disorganized. The newly formed Whig Party, a loose coalition of national Republicans, anti-Masons, and disaffected Democrats, was united only by its opposition to Andrew Jackson, whom they derisively called King Andrew I. Unable to agree on a single candidate to challenge Van Buren, the Whigs adopted a desperate and unusual strategy. They decided to run three different regional candidates: William Henry Harrison in the West, Daniel Webster in New England, and Hugh Lawson White in the South. Their hope was that each candidate would be popular enough in his respective region to deny Van Buren a majority in the Electoral College, throwing the election into the House of Representatives, where they believed they could defeat him. Van Buren's campaign was a model of party discipline. He ran on a platform that promised to follow in the footsteps of his illustrious predecessor. This message was designed to appeal directly to the legions of voters who remained fiercely loyal to Andrew Jackson. The Democratic Party's extensive network of newspapers, local committees, and political organizers worked tirelessly to get out the vote. They portrayed Van Buren as the champion of the common man, a defender of states' rights, and an opponent of the concentrated power of the national bank and other privileged monopolies. The campaign successfully branded the Whigs as the party of the wealthy elite, out of touch with the needs of the average American farmer and laborer. When the votes were counted, the Whig strategy had failed. While the regional candidates did win their respective states, Van Buren managed to secure a clear majority of the electoral votes, winning 170 to the combined 124 of his opponents. He also won a narrow majority of the popular vote. The victory was a triumph for Van Buren and the political organization he had so painstakingly constructed. He had successfully ridden Jackson's coattails to the White House, becoming the 8th president of the United States. However, he was also inheriting the immense economic challenges that were bubbling just beneath the surface, problems that would soon erupt and define his presidency. Martin Van Buren was inaugurated on March 4, 1837, inheriting the mantle of his popular predecessor, Andrew Jackson. In his inaugural address, he expressed a sense of profound reverence for the nation's past, and a cautious optimism for its future. He was at the pinnacle of his political career, the master strategist who had reached the highest office in the land. Yet storm clouds were gathering on the economic horizon, and his presidency would soon be consumed by a crisis not of his own making. The economic boom of the Jackson years, fueled by land speculation, easy credit, and the administration's own financial policies, was about to come to a dramatic and painful end. Just weeks into his term, the American economy collapsed. In May 1837, banks in New York City began to suspend specie payments, meaning they would no longer redeem paper currency for gold or silver. This triggered a financial panic that spread rapidly across the nation, leading to what became known as the Panic of 1837. Banks failed, businesses went bankrupt, and unemployment soared. Prices for cotton and other agricultural goods plummeted, devastating farmers and planters. The crisis was caused by a combination of factors, including Jackson's war against the Second Bank of the United States, a subsequent tightening of credit by British banks, and rampant land speculation in the West. Faced with this unprecedented economic depression, Van Buren adhered strictly to the principles of Jeffersonian and Jacksonian democracy. He believed that the federal government should have a very limited role in the economy, and that direct intervention or aid would be both unconstitutional and unwise. He rejected calls for the government to charter a new national bank, or to provide direct relief to struggling citizens. Instead, he proposed a solution he believed would separate the government from the volatile banking system, the independent treasury system. This plan called for the federal government to hold its own funds in vaults or sub-treasuries, completely independent of private or state banks. Van Buren's proposal was deeply controversial. The Whigs, led by Henry Clay and Daniel Webster, savaged the plan, arguing it would only worsen the Depression by locking away money that could be used for investment and credit. Even some conservative Democrats balked at the independent treasury, viewing it as too radical. Van Buren spent the majority of his presidency fighting to pass this legislation. The long and bitter debate over his proposal consumed his administration, defined his one term in office, and left him politically vulnerable as the economic hardship continued unabated. As the election of 1840 approached, the country was still reeling from the effects of the Panic of 1837. Martin Van Buren, unfairly but inevitably, bore the brunt of the blame. The Whigs, having learned from their disorganized defeat in 1836, united behind a single candidate, William Henry Harrison, the hero of the Battle of Tippecanoe. To appeal to a broad electorate, they presented Harrison as a simple, humble frontiersman who lived in a log cabin and drank hard cider. This was a complete fabrication. Harrison was actually a wealthy, well-educated aristocrat, but it was brilliant political marketing. The Whigs turned the Democrats' own common man tactics against them. The Whigs launched the log cabin and hard cider campaign, one of the most colorful and boisterous in American history. They held massive rallies, sang campaign songs, and distributed countless trinkets and banners. They contrasted their supposed man of the people, Old Tippecanoe, with President Van Buren, whom they portrayed as an out-of-touch, aristocratic dandy. They nicknamed him Martin Van Buren, and mocked him for supposedly eating off gold plates and installing luxurious baths in the White House. The campaign was light on substance and heavy on spectacle, but it was incredibly effective at tapping into the public's economic anxieties and frustrations. Van Buren and the Democrats were caught completely off guard. They tried to campaign on the issues, defending the independent treasury and warning against the dangers of a new national bank, but their sober, reasoned arguments were drowned out by the Whigs' catchy slogans and festive parades. Van Buren was unable to shake the image of a cold, aloof politician responsible for the nation's economic woes. The political magician who had perfected the art of popular campaigning found himself on the receiving end of an even more potent populist movement. The election result was a landslide defeat for Van Buren. Harrison won a commanding victory in the Electoral College, 234-60, and carried the popular vote by a comfortable margin. Van Buren became a one-term president, turned out of office by the very populist wave he had helped to create. Though disappointed, he did not retire from politics. He remained the leader of the Democratic Party and was the front-runner for the nomination in 1844. However, his principled stand against the immediate annexation of Texas, which he feared would lead to war with Mexico and inflame sectional tensions over slavery, cost him the support of Southern Democrats. The party instead nominated James K. Polk, who went on to win the presidency. After his final defeat for the Democratic nomination in 1844, Martin Van Buren gracefully exited the national stage and returned to his beloved estate, Lindenwold, in his hometown of Kinderhook, New York. He had purchased the property during his presidency and spent his retirement years transforming it into a beautiful and productive farm. Here, he lived as a gentleman farmer, the sage of Lindenwold, receiving visits from friends, family, and political figures who sought his counsel. He remained an astute observer of the nation's politics, maintaining a lively correspondence and writing his memoirs, a detailed account of his long and eventful career. Van Buren's personal life was marked by both happiness and tragedy. In 1807 he married his childhood sweetheart and distant cousin, Hannah Hose. By all accounts, their marriage was a deeply affectionate one. They had 5 sons, 4 of whom survived to adulthood. Tragically, Hannah died of tuberculosis in 1819, at the young age of 35. Van Buren was devastated and never remarried, remaining a widower for the rest of his long life. He raised his sons with the help of relatives, and he remained exceptionally close to them throughout his life. His 4th son, John Van Buren, became a prominent New York politician in his own right, continuing the family's political legacy. One final, dramatic return to the political arena came in 1848. As the debate over the extension of slavery into the territories acquired from Mexico intensified, Van Buren's long-held reservations about slavery's expansion came to the forefront. He accepted the presidential nomination of the new Free Soil Party, a coalition of anti-slavery Democrats and Whigs. Their platform was simple: to prevent the spread of slavery into the Western territories. Van Buren knew he had no chance of winning, but he ran on principle. His candidacy siphoned enough votes from the Democratic nominee Lewis Cass in the crucial state of New York to hand the election to the Whig candidate, Zachary Taylor. In his final years at Lindenwold, Van Buren watched with growing alarm as the sectional tensions he had worked so hard to manage during his career finally tore the nation apart. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, the aging former president, though in failing health, gave his unwavering support to President Abraham Lincoln and the Union cause. He had spent his political life building a national party to hold the country together, and he lived just long enough to see it fracture. Martin Van Buren died at Lindenwold on July 24, 1862, at the age of 79. He was buried beside his beloved wife Hannah in the Kinderhook cemetery, his life's journey having come full circle, ending in the same small village where it had begun. Martin Van Buren's presidency is often overshadowed by the economic crisis that dominated his single term, and by the towering figure of his predecessor, Andrew Jackson. He is frequently remembered as an unlucky president, a skilled politician who was swept into office on a wave of prosperity and swept out by a tide of depression. While his presidency was indeed fraught with challenges that led to his defeat in 1840, this narrow focus obscures his most significant and lasting contribution to American history. His true legacy lies not in the policies of his presidency, but in his role as the principal architect of the modern American political system. Before Van Buren, political parties were often seen as dangerous factions, a threat to Republican virtue. The Founding Fathers had warned against them, hoping for a government run by disinterested statesmen. Van Buren completely transformed this view. He championed the idea that permanent, organized political parties were not only necessary but beneficial for a large and diverse republic. He argued that parties disciplined political conflict, provided voters with clear choices, and made government more responsive to the will of the people. He created a system where loyalty to party principles, rather than to powerful individuals, became the organizing force of political life. This innovation laid the groundwork for the two-party system that has defined American politics ever since. The political machinery he perfected, the use of party conventions, a partisan press, and a system of patronage to enforce discipline, became the standard playbook for American politics for over a century. While the spoils system has been justly criticized, Van Buren saw it as a democratic tool to remove an entrenched elite bureaucracy and replace it with people who were responsive to the victorious party's mandate. He was a pragmatist who understood that to achieve ideological goals, one first had to build a durable organization capable of winning and holding power. His creation of the Democratic Party as a national mass-based institution was a work of political genius. In the end, Martin Van Buren's story is one of profound irony. He was a master of popular politics who was ultimately undone by a populist revolt. He was a little magician who could pull the levers of power with unmatched skill, yet he could not conjure a solution to a devastating economic crisis. However, to judge him solely on his one-term presidency is to miss the larger picture. He was a transitional figure who helped guide the United States from the era of the founders to the age of mass democracy. His innovations in political organization fundamentally reshaped the republic, creating the structures of party politics that, for better and for worse, continue to shape the American experiment.